Rabideau itself was built in 1935. There was originally a Ccc company from Missouri that came up here and built the camp. And apparently they didn't like the cold very much. We had pretty cold winters. So they were reassigned to California. And meantime, there was a company of Ccc men that were stationed at the Lake Winnibigoshish camp, and they were transferred to Rabideau, and that became Company 708, which was the company that was there until the camp closed in 1941. As I said, the Ccc folks did a lot of different projects on the forest. There were 23 camps on the Chippewa National Forest. Not all of them were operating at the same time. And actually, 3 of them also became prisoner of war camps after the World War II started. Because these Ccc camps were never intended to be permanent, most of them were dismantled, torn down, burned, in some cases removed and sold. And there just are very few, only scattered buildings here and there. But because this camp was maintained and put to use, it was basically saved from the wrecking ball.
The whole idea of creating innovative programs for youth started in 2005. That's when a group of people on the Leech Lake Indian Reservation got together to find solutions to a wave of crime and violence that had swept the region. Rabideau coordinator Dan Evans says the effort was born out of tragedy.
At that time, that's when they had the Red Lake shooting. They had 5 or 6 homicides on the reservation, Leech Lake Reservation, and it was a different world in 2005 than it is nowadays.
Those early meetings resulted in partnerships between the tribe, government agencies, school districts, and nonprofits. Several foundations provided more than $100,000 to develop a strategy. At the same time, the U.S. Forest Service was looking for new uses for the old Civilian Conservation Corps buildings at Camp Rabideau. Randy Finn is deputy director of the Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe. He's also chairman of the newly formed nonprofit Rabideau Conservation Academy and Learning Center. Finn says it's all a work in progress, but the dream is to turn Rabideau back into the sort of place it was during the Great Depression, a place where young people learn to work hard and gain new skills.
I see it as being a base for maybe a Job Corps, AmeriCorps. I see it as being a base for maybe Minnesota Conservation Corps programs, our own language immersion for the tribal people. I see it as an outdoor learning center, and perhaps even at some point in time having it being almost an alternative learning center, almost as a charter type school.
Right now, these old Ccc barracks aren't in any shape to house young people overnight, but that's about to change. The U.S. Forest Service recently received $1.5 million to complete weatherization and other renovations at Rabideau. That's good news for Mary Knipp. She's a historian for the U.S. Forest Service. Knipp's grandfather was a Ccc worker in the 1930s, and she thinks he might have worked at this very camp. Knipp says it's exciting to see Rabideau come to life again after so many idle years.
Kind of like watching a cocoon open up and butterfly emerging. We're not quite opened completely yet, or we're not flying yet, let's say that. But it's getting there, and see kids here again. It's been silent for so long.
This is a 112-acre site, and it's just beautiful. And it's classified and listed as a national landmark, as the best preserved civilian conservation corps in the United States. And there's not very many of those, less than 2,500 landmarks. And in order to be a landmark, you have to be a significant part of the United States history. We're doing a lady slipper survey project along the scenic highway out here, which is scheduled to start reconstruction next year or 2010. And there's about 10,000 lady slippers up and down the highway, and a lot of those are going to be casualties when they do the reconstruction. So we're marking where those are going to be so we can relocate them. So that's the kind of service learning and conservation projects we're trying to do.
We're in the process of restoring the original buildings back to their original shape and putting new foundation and subflooring underneath them at this time. This is approximately a week's worth of work that's been done so far with the removing the building and taking the old flooring out. A little bit, we're doing some bracing, we're putting new flooring in, and then some rebracing some of the existing that is damaged and rotted.
So you're not tearing up the whole building, you're just
No,
like,
the building will stay intact pretty much as we see it, and trying to save it the best we can.
What was it like growing up in the Depression?
It wasn't really too bad for us on the farm. We had always had plenty to eat and seemed to be no trouble getting clothes, and of course there weren't as many expenses. We didn't have, of course we didn't have the technical entertainment they do nowadays.
No. But I don't think anybody did,
No,
did they?
no.
I've heard that before, that those who were on the farm really didn't have it.
It never really bothered us. It probably bothered my father more because there was taxes to pay and so on, and cash money was really hard to find.
And I suppose just the idea of it, taking care of his family, that was a big
Yeah,
family
right,
to
yeah.
take care of.
Yeah.
Did your mother then do a lot of cooking or canning? And
Oh yes, we canned lots of vegetables, and we picked lots of fruit. In fall we had to pick wild raspberries and blueberries. So
we did that, and it wasn't the Depression, but
She canned about 100 quarts of fruit every year.
handy in the winter though, isn't it?
Oh yeah, we had all our food.
How about meat? How did you keep your meat from?
In the winter we had a box lined with metal,
Mm-hmm.
so rodents couldn't chew in. Just set it outdoors in the shade. We kept our meat
You
that
keep
way.
snow around it or
Yeah,
anything?
yeah, so it'd be cold.
It's kind of the way we did. My dad was the last iceman in Bemidji, so
Oh.
we didn't get a fridge till everybody else had one.
No, we never even had ice. We lived on the Mississippi River. We were a long ways from any lake, so it was hard to get. The river water was a little too muddy.
I would think
Didn't
so.
like the ice. They had a special crew that worked most of the year just cutting firewood. I have some pictures in that book that show the wood piles. They're just huge.
Well, I'm sure with the cook fire and all the
All the
can
buildings.
buildings had to be heated.
Yeah, we had 6 barracks, and there was 3 stoves in each barracks. And then all the rest of the buildings, the hospital building and power plant and the office and officers' quarters and dining room.
Yeah, it is quite a few different
A lot of
places.
stove,
isn't
a lot of
it? Yeah.
wood stoves.
The buildings at Rabideau were actually prefabricated. They were built in sections that were bolted together after they arrived here on a train, and then they were modified as needed by carpenters and CCC enrollees. And one of the biggest problems we have with the preservation out there is that they basically have no foundations under them. It's a wonder that they've survived the difficult Minnesota winters with the freezing and thawing over so many years. A lot of the buildings are twisted and racked because of all the freezing and thawing and the movement. They basically have no foundations under them. Most cases they simply were built on piers that were dug into the ground. And one of our primary objectives out there with the restoration is to pick those buildings up and put a foundation underneath them. We've done that with several buildings now. And of course then we repair the roof and restore the interiors into apartments and other things, apartments and offices. And so we try and restore that back to the original condition. We've used the Passport in Time program a few years ago to restore the education building, which was the building that was used as a classroom. We had volunteers from that program come and do all kinds of carpentry and endless painting, and also volunteers from Minnesota Conservation Corps and other programs locally here. So there's been a lot of effort put into restoration of those buildings, and we have a couple more in progress now, and hopefully next year we'll also be able to put the finishing touches on the recreation building and other officers' quarters out there. One of the ways that we would like to preserve the camp is to find another occupant under special use permit to use the camp. And it's very expensive, as you might imagine, to restore and maintain all those buildings out there. And it's kind of silly to have empty buildings sitting out in the woods. So what we'd like to do is get a tenant out there to provide some programs that benefit the local community. And we've been talking to a consortium of organizations that include the tribal college, the reservations here, the Boys and Girls Clubs here, the Minnesota Conservation Corps, and a number of other organizations that are interested in providing some training classes. We have we are working with them to set up a conservation academy and learning center out there to provide training opportunities for young folks, probably two age groups, the younger kids and the older teenagers, to either go out as a day camp sort of a thing for the youngsters, or an overnight camp for the older kids, and provide learning opportunities for them so that they can develop some skills and interests, and provide them with the resources that they need to pursue a career of some kind. So we're hoping that that will pan out in the next couple of years, and that we'll get an occupant in there who can not only maintain the historic buildings, but probably add some additional facilities that meet their needs, and that camp will be preserved for many years.
I'm from Baudette, Minnesota.
And you stayed at this camp? You worked here?
For 22 months. I lied my age to get in. And so I'm a year off, but I got caught with a car, so they discharged me. So I didn't get my 2 years out of the deal. But we had a good 22. We had a wonderful camp here.
Tell me about the buildings behind you. Is that where you stayed?
That was Section 6. See, the university changed everything around.
What was the toughest job you had in camp?
Well, really, I never did have any. We worked hard, but to work hard was the name of the game. Those days.
Did you have any adverse conditions like cold, bugs?
No, we had there's a picture in that building there. This building, where there's about that much ice on the wall on the south side. But we never were cold. We had wood. We had 2 big stoves in each barracks, one on each end, you know. And a night guard went through once every hour. So the fire was always going, and that there was a lot of them that figured there was hardships, but they really wasn't.
When you left here, were you drafted in World War II?
No, I didn't get drafted until the Armistice Day, and I'll tell you how that happened, or the reason I'm telling it to you. I was listening. I turned the TV on one afternoon, and there was a commentator that asked the question 3 times. Do you know exactly what you were doing when the armistice was signed? And they asked it again, and the 3rd time he put some real affirmative. He says, exactly what you were doing. And I was down in Fort Snelling. There was 250 of us naked. We were getting our shots and we were headed across. And when that came over the intercom, they just dropped us, turned around and hauled us back home.
As we move forward with this into this, it's good to look back and see something that saved young lives back in the 30s having that same impact in the 21st century. And as we move forward, I think this camp is going to have not only a regional impact, but it'll also gather some of the national spotlight on the things you can do, taking old concepts and making them new again, and working toward making young lives more productive, giving opportunity where there is none, and giving everybody a chance to really commit to youth, commit to education, commit to that transition to adulthood, which seems to be so hard for so many young people in today's world. And sometimes going backwards and taking the things that we had in history and making them new again has the biggest impact. And Rabideau also does something else, which is it takes a lot of these kids from the couch out into the woods. It takes them from being nature deprived to being nature enriched, and it gives them an opportunity to enjoy what all of us take for granted, which is a great environment and love and understanding of the great outdoors and the conservation and working in that environment to make it a better place.
Well, let me tell you a little bit about Camp Rabideau and how it came to be. Back after during the Great Depression, President Roosevelt established the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, in 1933, and it was a package of what was called the New Deal. A number of organizations and programs that were created to help bring the country out of the Great Depression. The CCC was intended to help train young men and give their families a little help as well. They were enrolled into the CCC, and they were paid about $30, 25 of which had to go back home to their families. And they did all kinds of work on the forest. There were not just National Forest CCC camps, but also state camps, and I believe the Park Service also, National Park Service had some camps as well. And they are really responsible for most of the infrastructure that we have on the Chippewa National Forest now. They did just a tremendous amount of work. It was a great labor force, source of labor, and of course it benefited the young men by teaching them different skills and trades. They also had educational programs for them. A lot of them hadn't completed high school and that kind of thing, and had to go to work because their families were poor. So a lot of them didn't have very much of an education. So that was the purpose of the program, was to try and garner the human resources to take care of the natural resources as well. That was the philosophy of the program. Because these CCC camps were never intended to be permanent, most of them were dismantled, torn down, burned, in some cases removed and sold, and there just are very few, only scattered buildings here and there. But because this camp was maintained and put to use, it was basically saved from the wrecking ball. The significance of the CCC camp is that it represents a period in the history of this country that was really pivotal in terms of its economic and social development. The CCC contributed a great deal to not only the infrastructure of the national forest here and the local economy, but it was also contributed to the human resources the conservation of the human resources that were out there. These young men were pretty much hopeless, and their families were destitute, and it gave them some skills and hope to recover the economic injury they had suffered as a result of the Great Depression. It also, provided them with skills, and it's possible, especially during the later years, it also helped us to win World War II. These young men were used to camp life, running under the Army, so when the war finally came along, they knew pretty much what to expect in the Army or Navy, and I'm sure they were much better prepared to be soldiers and sailors fighting a war than they would have been if they hadn't participated in the CCC. This particular camp is the best preserved out of about 4,500 camps, very few of which exist anymore. There are just a few buildings here and there that survive. So we have a great treasure here that's worth preserving. The Forest Service signed a memorandum of agreement after the site was listed on the National Register and agreed to preserve 4 of the buildings out there. And that plan at that time was to remove the others as they became significantly deteriorated. It did remove about half of the buildings that were out there at the time, but as time has gone on, we've realized the value of the place in terms of its rarity and its significance to the country, and we now are much more willing to provide resources to restore the camp and possibly to put it back to use. So we have restored a few more buildings and are in the process of doing that. And hopefully someday all of those buildings will be restored back to their original condition.
When Franklin Roosevelt took office in 1933, one of his first initiatives was to create the Civilian Conservation Corps. He took scores of men who were unemployed and moved them to camps on the public lands and used them to do all sorts of things.
In just 4 months, an array of ambitious government programs was put into place.
President Roosevelt's attack on the Depression began with his emergency conservation project, the purpose of which he clearly expressed when he said, "This enterprise is an established part of our national policy. It will pay dividends to the present and future generations." The President's profound interest in this work prompted him to visit and personally inspect several of the conservation camps. This conservation army is rebuilding the forests, one of our most important and valuable natural resources.
The New Deal workers helped the Forest Service develop on a much larger scale. In California, they cut a fire break of more than 600 miles through the Sierra Nevada. They restored totem poles in Alaska. They constructed Timberline Lodge on Oregon's Mount Hood. In the prairie states, they planted 2,000 miles of tree windbreaks on farms from Texas to Minnesota.
Yeah, it was snow. It was night before last.
Hello, everyone. Hello. My name is Mike. I want to thank you all for showing up, visiting the most well-preserved CCC camp in the nation. And I want to introduce a gentleman that's authored books, made DVDs and music CDs about the boys of the camp. So I want to introduce you and give a warm welcome to Bill Jamison. Thank you, Mike.
Can you hear me out there in the back?
Yeah.
Oh, great. Well, I'm delighted to be here. I was telling Mary, he's doing such a wonderful job here, Mary Nip, over the years, that I've traveled all over the country. I think I've been in about 10 states visiting parks and reunions and so forth. And this is by far the finest example of a CCC restoration project I've had the privilege of being in. It really is a treasure. Some places you might have 3 or 4 buildings, but to have, you know, a couple dozen buildings, and they're still refurbishing them. You know, the ones that aren't finished, they're raising funds for. So it's a great treasure, and it's a privilege to be here today. And I'm going to talk about why it's important and why they need to be preserved, and why we need to promote this legacy and the story of the CCC. Fatten you up, your mom won't know you because you're all filled out. When you eat, no talking at the table. Cook's got a knife, he's a bit unstable. It's not gourmet, but 3 times a day. Eat all you want, you don't have to pay. If it ain't moving, I'm digging in. No telling where this food's been. If my stomach could talk, it would shout, hallelujah. If you ask me to walk, I'm gonna come running right to ya, 'cause it's chow time. I hear some stomachs growling out there. Someone want those, you better hide those cookies, Mary. Thank you.
Camp Rabideau is located on a 112-acre tract approximately 5 miles south of Blackduck. If you wish to visit, a host will provide tours from May through September. The education building and picnic site can be reserved for meetings or special tours by calling the Blackduck Ranger District.